Imagine you are sitting in a quiet conference room inside one of the most successful video game studios in the world. Outside that room, your team just shipped the biggest entertainment launch in human history. And then, without warning, the door opens, security guards walk in, your bosses are gone, fired, and the executives standing in front of your shock team say these exact words, documented by a former developer who was there. Look, I get it. I know this is a tough situation, but just take the money and get over it. That moment, that cold-blooded, calculated event, is just one chapter in a story that most Call of Duty fans have never heard in full. Because behind every great shooter, behind every dopamine rush of a kill streak, behind the billions and billions of dollars, there is a history that is darker, messier, and more fascinating than anything they put in the campaign. And today, on the Inventor realm, we are going to go through all of it. The story begins in 2002 when three developers named Vince Zampella, Jason West, and Grant Collier left a studio called 2015 Inc., the team behind the beloved Medal of Honor, Allied Assault. Dissatisfied with their deality, they turned to a publisher named Activision, who agreed to pay $1.5 million for a 30% stake in their new studio, which they called Infinity Ward. 25 developers, one shared dream, and a game they were building from scratch to compete in a World War II shooter market that was already crowded. What they delivered would change everything. In 2003, that very first Call of Duty launched exclusively on PC. The day after the game released, Activision bought the rest of Infinity Ward outright. The game went on to win over 80 Game of the Year awards and 47 Editor's Choice awards. That is not a typo. 80 for a debut title. For a studio that had barely existed a year ago, the gaming world sat up and paid attention. Activision certainly did. 2 years later, in 2005, Infinity Ward released Call of Duty 2 for the Xbox 360. It sold more than 1 million copies in the United States alone, making it the first Xbox 360 game to hit that milestone. But the true turning point, the moment that separated Call of Duty from every other shooter on the market, came in 2007. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare abandoned World War II entirely hand-dropped players into a fictional near-future conflict that felt startlingly real. The title was a massive success, selling more than 10 million copies in just 9 months and winning multiple major gaming awards. It did not just sell well, it rewrote the rules of what a first-person shooter was supposed to be. The leveling system, the unlockable perks, the kill streaks, the theater of online multiplayer, all of it felt brand new. Call of Duty 4 was, as many in the gaming community have noted over the years, what Halo was in 2001 for console shooters. It defined mass appeal competitive gaming for a generation. And then things started to get complicated. Flush with the success of Modern Warfare, Zampella and West went back to Activision with a bold demand. They promised to deliver Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 in 2009, but in exchange they asked for extremely large bonuses and creative control over the entire Call of Duty franchise. Activision agreed, but slipped a clause into the contract. If Zampella and West were ever fired, the rights to Call of Duty would revert fully back to Activision. That clause, buried quietly in the legalese, would turn out to be the most consequential sentence in gaming history. Modern Warfare 2 launched in November 2009 and broke records immediately. It brought in $310 million on its very first day of release. But it also carried something that no one in gaming had ever quite attempted before, a mission called No Russian. In it, the player goes undercover as a CIA operative embedded with a group of terrorists who open fire on civilians in a Moscow airport. The mission was widely discussed ahead of release for its uncompromising approach, and it drew criticism from a broad range of voices. Some praised Infinity Ward for taking a genuine narrative risk, for making the player feel complicit in something horrific in order to tell a story about extremism and sacrifice. Others called it gratuitous, irresponsible, and a cheap attempt at shock value. The debate raged for months inside the gaming press, in parliament chambers in countries like Russia and Australia, and in conversations between parents and their teenagers. It was the first real proof that Call of Duty had grown big enough to be a cultural event, not just a game. But while that public debate was happening, something far more sinister was unfolding behind closed doors. Internally at Activision, the operation targeting Zampella and West had already been given a code name, Project Icebreaker. According to legal filings and accounts from people involved, Activision instructed employees to, simply put, dig up dirt on them. The company's former IT director later admitted to being asked to monitor their emails and access their phones and computers. This was not about creative differences. This was a corporate operation to manufacture grounds for termination so that the clause in the contract could be triggered, and so that Activision could keep Call of Duty without paying the bonuses that West and Zampella had negotiated. In February 2010, events came to a head. Activision hired a law firm to formally investigate Infinity Ward, and shortly after, West and Zampella were terminated for alleged insubordination and breaches of contract. Former Infinity Ward developer Paul Sandler later wrote about the moment on LinkedIn, saying the entire team was stunned. Security guards were stationed at the doors to ensure West and Zampella could not return. Sandler wrote that the sudden, cold-blooded manner of the firings brought the team a collective feeling of anger and deep unfairness. Activision then offered the remaining staff a 50% pay raise and their Modern Warfare to bonuses if they would stay. 40 out of 100 people refused and left in solidarity. A significant number of them followed West and Zampella to a new studio they founded called Respawn Entertainment. The lawsuit that followed was staggering. West and Zampella initially filed suit seeking unpaid royalties estimated at $36 million, a figure that eventually rose to over $1 billion by May 2012 based on Activision's own filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Activision countersued West and Zampella and also added Electronic Arts to the suit, accusing the pair of conspiring with AI while still employed by Activision. All parties ultimately reached undisclosed settlements by the end of May 2012. The men who built the most successful first-person shooter franchise in history had been removed from it, had their emails secretly monitored, and then had to fight $1 billion legal battle just to be compensated for their work. If you are watching this right now and you are thinking, I had no idea any of this happened, I want you to take 1 second and subscribe to the Inventor Realm. Because this kind of deep dive storytelling, the real history behind the games you grew up with, is exactly what we do here. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a video like this one. Now let us keep going because the story only gets darker. With Infinity Ward gutted and rebuilding under Activision's control, the franchise was now spread across multiple studios. Treyarch had been brought in to help produce additional Call of Duty games on a rotating schedule with Infinity Ward. Modern Warfare 3, built partly by the remaining Infinity Ward staff alongside Sledgehammer Games, launched in 2011 and grossed over $400 million in the United States and United Kingdom alone in its first 24 hours. Becoming the fastest entertainment product in history to reach $1 billion in revenue, doing so in 16 days, beating the movie Avatar. The franchise was now bigger than Hollywood, bigger than music, bigger than anything. And yet, the cultural weight of all that size was beginning to have consequences. Debates erupted repeatedly over whether Call of Duty was glorifying war, making violence look aspirational, or worse, actively serving as a recruitment tool for the military. Critics pointed out that Activision had publicly discussed partnerships with branches of the U.S. military. and that the game's hyper-realistic weapon handling and modern military aesthetic made them uniquely effective at presenting warfare as exciting and consequence-free. As recently as 2024, families affected by the 2020 Uvalde school shooting filed a lawsuit against Activision alongside other defendants, alleging that Call of Duty promoted specific brands of firearms to teenagers. Activision argued the games are protected under the First Amendment. That lawsuit represents one of the most serious accusations ever leveled at a video game franchise, and its implications go far beyond Call of Duty. Meanwhile, inside Activision's offices, a completely separate crisis was building. In July 2021, the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing filed a lawsuit after a 2-year investigation. The lawsuit alleged that Activision Blizzard had fostered a culture in which female employees endured regular sexual harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. The company's workforce was approximately 80% male. Women described working there as being like a frat house, with inappropriate comments and physical contact that were, in some cases, encouraged by supervisors. When employees reported the misconduct, the response was not support, it was retaliation. Some were transferred, sidelined, or fired. The lawsuit described practices so disturbing that many industry veterans said it confirmed what they had long suspected about the culture at the top of the gaming world's most powerful publisher. Activision Blizzard eventually agreed to pay nearly $55 million to resolve the state of California's legal fight. The total amount paid across all harassment-related settlements came to over $100 million, according to reporting from multiple outlets, including documented analyses of the franchise's controversies. And through all of this, the games kept coming. Black Ops, Black Ops 2, Ghosts, Advanced Warfare, Black Ops 3, Infinite Warfare, World War II, Black Ops 4, Modern Warfare 2019, Black Ops Cold War, Vanguard, Modern Warfare 2 in 2022, and then Modern Warfare 3 in 2023, every single year. No exceptions, because for Activision, Call of Duty was not a creative project, it was a revenue engine, and engines do not take years off. Modern Warfare 3 in 2023 went down in gaming history as one of the most criticized entries in the franchise, featuring a campaign that players widely described as forgettable and launching with no new multiplayer maps. Critics and fans alike described it as a cash grab that served no purpose beyond generating revenue. It was the first Modern Warfare game led by Sledgehammer and not Infinity Ward, and the backlash was fierce. But here is the thing. Even at its most cynical, even when the community was screaming that the franchise had sold its soul, the numbers kept climbing. The full Call of Duty franchise has surpassed $33 billion in lifetime revenue through 2024. According to statements made by former CEO Bobby Kotick, at least 250 million people have played some version of Call of Duty at least once in their lives. Warzone, the free-to-play battle royale launched in 2020, added entirely new audiences to the franchise. Warzone earns an estimated $5.2 million per day from in-game purchases alone, and had between 30 and 50 million monthly active players across platforms as of early 2026. The different versions of Call of Duty tell a story all by themselves. The original series on PC was for gamers who wanted a cinematic World War II experience. Modern Warfare transformed it into the definitive console multiplayer game. Black Ops brought in espionage storytelling, Cold War settings, and a darker tonal palette that attracted a slightly older, more narrative-focused audience. Treyarch's Zombies mode, introduced in World at War in 2008, created a loyal cult following that has persisted through every Black Ops entry since. Warzone democratized the franchise by making it free and inviting players from Fortnite and Apex Legends into the Call of Duty ecosystem. And Call of Duty Mobile, launched in 2019, brought the franchise to billions of Android and iOS users across the world. with the core player base now primarily spanning ages 16 to 34, with the most competitive players clustering between 18 and 29. These are not just gamers. These are people who grew up with this franchise, who reference its maps and weapons in everyday conversation, whose cultural vocabulary includes terms like kill streak and prestige that originated entirely inside this game. The cultural impact of Call of Duty is impossible to fully measure. It normalized online multiplayer for an entire console generation. It made voice chat a standard feature of gaming. It introduced millions of young Americans to the aesthetics and language of modern military operations in a way that no other media had ever managed. It shaped how a generation thinks about warfare, about heroism, about the idea of what a soldier is, and that is a responsibility that the franchise has not always handled gracefully. Even founding members of Infinity Ward have spoken publicly about the pressure they felt from Activision to push the franchise in politically charged directions. One founding developer revealed that after the Respawn formation, there was an attempt by Activision to pressure the remaining studio into making a Call of Duty game specifically about Iran attacking Israel. According to the developer, the vast majority of the team was opposed to the idea and it was ultimately rejected. The fact that this pressure existed at all tells you everything you need to know about how Activision saw the franchise, not as a piece of art, but as a tool. In January 2022, Microsoft announced its intention to acquire Activision Blizzard for $68.7 billion. It was the largest acquisition in gaming history, and Call of Duty was at the center of it. Sony fought the deal for months, arguing that the franchise was so dominant that making it an Xbox exclusive would devastate competition. In July 2023, Sony finally agreed to a 10-year deal with Microsoft to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation. On October 13, 2023, Activision Blizzard officially became a subsidiary of Microsoft Gaming, the company that had fired the men who built the franchise, that had run Project Icebreaker against its own developers, that had paid over $100 million to settle sexual harassment allegations, now belonged to the most valuable company in the world. The most recent mainline entry, Black Ops 6, released in October 2024, had the biggest launch month in Call of Duty franchise history in terms of total players. The broader franchise brought in an estimated $4.2 billion in revenue in 2024, driven significantly by that launch. The game introduced On the Movement, a new locomotion system that allowed players to sprint and slide in any direction, and it was widely praised as a genuine step forward for the series after years of mixed entries. So what does all of this mean? What is the lesson buried inside this 20-plus year story? The lesson, if there is one, is that great things are almost never built cleanly. Call of Duty began as the passion project of 25 developers who left a comfortable job because they believed they could make something extraordinary. And they did. They made something that 3 generations of gamers now carry in their memories. But the machine that was built around that creative core, the corporate engine, the annual release cycle, the billion-dollar lawsuits, the workplace scandals, the political pressures, the monetization strategies, was something far more complicated and far less heroic. The game that taught you about war was itself shaped by a war. A war over money, over credit, over control, over what Call of Duty was allowed to be and who got to decide. The men who built it were forced out. The studio that made it was hollowed and rebuilt multiple times. The company that owned it paid hundreds of millions to settle allegations about how it treated its own people. And still, every year, hundreds of millions of players load into a lobby, hear that familiar sound, and feel something that no amount of corporate drama can fully erase. The pure, addictive thrill of a game that, at its best, is still one of the most technically accomplished and emotionally engaging shooters ever made. That is the dark history of Call of Duty, not just the controversies, but the human cost of building something this big. If this video gave you a new perspective on a franchise you thought you knew, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you are not subscribed to the Inventor Realm yet, now is the time. We cover the real stories behind the biggest names in gaming, the facts the studios do not put in the press releases. Sourced from court documents, industry reporting from outlets like Kotaku, Wikipedia, IGN, Bloomberg, NPR, and direct legal filings. Every claim in this video comes from a verified source because you deserve the truth, not the marketing. We will see you in the next one.